Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. I come out to do a brief introduction of these things because I know when there's this much anticipation in a room, a little bit of disappointment is good for you. And I am here to embody that disappointment just for a couple of seconds. I'm Michael Williams, and I'm the director of the Wheeler Centre. The Wheeler Centre, which is on its annual break. Our first program for 2013 doesn't kick off until the 9th of February. With our opening gala event at the Town Hall. It's going to be a cracker. Tickets for the rest of Program 1 go on sale and everything's announced on February the 1st. So if you don't already get our email updates, you really should sign up for them now because you will miss out. That's a promise. You personally will miss out. I will find your name and I will bar you from any of our events. So it's a little service I like to offer. Now, do you have a goodie on your seat, people, generally? This is a world exclusive, and that's the first time in my life I've been able to offer the words world exclusive without being mocked for it. A big thank you to Hachette Australia, who made it possible for you to see a sneak preview of this book before it's published in July of this year. So you're really ahead of the curve. And a big thank you to our guest tonight, Mr. Neil Gaiman, or at Neil himself. Please make him and Alicia Sometimes, our interviewer, very welcome.
For those of you who were here 13 months ago, I've swapped sides.
They know Neil. It's hot in Melbourne, and not just because of the temperature. Neil fucking Gaiman is here. Oh. I just wanted to say a couple of things before I introduce our lovely guest, and that's in Wigan Books are in the foyer, and Neil has pre-signed some copies, so please get your hands on some great merchandise and wonderful reads. And there will be Mike for questions. I won't hog him the whole time, I promise. But who is Neil Gaiman? Not only the author of the Sandman series or the Dream series or Anansi Boys, American Gods, 100-something awards. He's also the guy who wrote, "She says nothing at all, but simply stares upward into the dark sky and watches with sad eyes the slow dance of the infinite stars." Also, "I'm a madman with a box without a box." But my favourite descriptor is Easter egg bazookas. Mr. Neil Gaiman. Neil,
hello, Alicia.
Hello. You've got your book out, or coming out this year, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and we'd love to hear something, maybe to start off. I find a reading to start off is always beautiful.
Right. So you may have all noticed that you have a little chunk of The Ocean at the End of the Lane. You have the first 3 chapters in uncopy-edited, unproofread, uncorrected thing, which makes it really difficult for me because normally I would have been doing a reading from somewhere in the first 3 chapters. And I thought, I don't want to do that because maybe they'll follow along. So I thought I will read you chapter 5. I'm not going to read you the ending. That would spoil it all. When you learned that the butler did it, it would. So I'm going to read you chapter 5, which is the shortest and nastiest chapter I've ever written. But I better tell you a tiny bit about the book before I read you chapter 5, because it's really irritating when somebody randomly reads you a chapter of a book that you have no idea what's going on. Our narrator is 7 years old. He, a suicide has propelled some very peculiar things into existence. He has gone off with an 11-year-old witch who is many, many thousands, possibly millions of years old, and fought a nasty, dark, dangerous entity. And at one point during this fight, she did the fighting, not him. He let go of her hand and something hurt his foot. And now our 7-year-old hero is back in his house, and there's something going on in his foot. That evening, my sister sat on her bed, brushing her hair over and over. She brushed it 100 times every night and counted each brush stroke. I did not know why. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Looking at my foot," I told her. I was staring at the sole of my right foot. There was a pink line across the center of the sole, from the ball of the foot almost to the heel where I'd stepped on a broken glass as a toddler. I remember waking up in my cot the morning after it happened, looking at the black stitches that held the edges of the cut together. It was my earliest memory. I was used to the pink scar. The little hole beside it in the arch of my foot was new. It was where the sudden sharp pain had been, although it did not hurt. It was just a hole. I prodded it with my forefinger, and it seemed to me that something inside the hole retreated. My sister had stopped brushing her hair and was watching me curiously. I got up, walked out of the bedroom down the corridor to the bathroom at the end of the hall. I do not know why I did not ask an adult about it. I do not remember asking adults about anything except as a last resort. That was the year I dug out a wart from my knee with a penknife, discovering how deeply I could cut before it hurt and what the roots of a wart looked like. In the bathroom cupboard, behind the mirror, was a pair of stainless steel tweezers, the kind with pointed, sharp tips for pulling out wooden splinters, and a box of sticking plasters. I sat on the metal side of the white bathtub and examined the hole in my foot. It was a simple, small, round hole, smooth-edged. I couldn't see how deeply it went because something was in the way. Something was blocking it, something that seemed to retreat as the light touched it. I held my tweezers and I watched. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. I put the forefinger of my left hand over the hole, gently blocking the night light. Then I put the tip of the tweezers beside the hole and I waited. I counted to 100, inspired perhaps by my sister's hairbrushing. Then I pulled my finger away and stabbed in with the tweezers. I caught the head of the worm, if that was what it was, by the tip between the metal prongs, and I squeezed it, and I pulled. Have you ever tried to pull a worm from a hole? You know how hard they can hold on, the way they use their whole bodies to grip the sides of the hole. I pulled perhaps an inch of this worm, pink and grey, streaked like something infected, out of the hole in my foot, and then felt it stop. I could feel it inside my flesh, making itself rigid, unpullable. I was not scared by this. It was obviously just something that happened to people. Like when the neighbour's cat, Misty, had worms. I had a worm in my foot, and I was removing the worm. I twisted the tweezers, thinking, I suspect, of spaghetti on a fork, winding the worm around the tweezers. It tried to pull back, but I turned it a little at a time until I could definitely pull no further. I could feel inside me the sticky plastic way that it tried to hold on, like a strip of pure muscle. I leaned over as far as I could, reached out my left hand and turned on the bath's hot tap, the one with the red dot in the center, and I let it run. The water ran for 3-4 minutes out of the tap and down the plug hole before it began to steam. When the water was steaming, I extended my foot and my right arm, maintaining pressure on the tweezers and on the inch of the creature that I'd wound out of my body. Then I put the place where the tweezers was under the hot tap. The water splashed my foot, but my soles were barefoot hardened and I scarcely minded. The water that touched my fingers scalded them, but I was prepared for the heat. The worm wasn't. I felt it flex inside me, trying to pull back from the scalding water, felt it loosen its grip on the inside of my foot. I turned the tweezers triumphantly, like picking the best scab in the whole world, as the creature began to come out of me, putting up less and less resistance. I pulled at it steadily, and as it went under the hot water, it slackened until the end. It was almost all out of me. I could feel it, but I was too confident, too triumphant and impatient, and I tugged too quickly, too hard, and the worm came off in my hand. The end of it that it came out of me was oozing and broken, as if it had snapped off. Still, if the creature had left anything in my foot, it was tiny. I examined the worm. It was dark grey and light grey, streaked with pink, and segmented like a normal earthworm. Now it was out of the hot water, it seemed to be recovering, it wriggled, and the body that had been wrapped around the tweezers now dangled, writhing, although it hung from the head. Was it its head? How could I tell? Or I'd pinched it. I did not want to kill it. I did not kill animals, not if I could help it, but I had to get rid of it. It was dangerous, I had no doubt of that. I held the worm above the bath's plug hole, where it wriggled under the scalding water. Then I let it go and watched it vanish down the drain. I let the water run for a while and I washed off the tweezers. Then I put a small sticking plaster over the hole in the sole of my foot and put the plug in the bath to prevent the worm from climbing back up the open plug hole before I turned off the tap. I did not know if it was dead, but I did not think you came back from the drain. I put the tweezers back where I'd got them from, behind the bathroom mirror. Then I closed the mirror and stared at myself. I wondered, as I wondered so often when I was that age, who I was, and what exactly was looking at the face in the mirror. If the face I was looking at wasn't me, and I knew it wasn't because I would still be me, whatever happened to my face, then what was me? And what was watching? I went back to the bedroom. It was my night to have the door to the hallway open, and I waited until my sister was asleep and wouldn't tell on me. And then, in the dim light from the hall, I read a Secret 7 mystery until I fell asleep.
There's a moment in the book where the narrator's little kitten Fluffy dies and a well-meaning lodger replaces it with an angry, scruffy ginger tomcat and called Monster. And I'm thinking in most Neil Gaiman stories, a Fluffy is always replaced with a monster, whether it's Coraline's other mother or in Stardust, the Witch Queen. What is it about people who seem to be one thing and not really are?
I think that's part of the fun of fiction. And I think it's part of the fun of reality too, is that point where you discover that the fluffy people are nowhere near as fluffy as you thought they were. And it goes the other way too, that strange and glorious moment where you discover that people who you thought were monsters are actually terribly fluffy. I think part of the joy of being a writer is upsetting people's expectations, making them think, turning their worlds slightly upside down. And if you're going to bring on a character, then do something with them.
In the animated series Arthur, you were scuba diving in a smoothie at this point, or your animated self was, and and I'm paraphrasing, but Sue Ellen asks, you've done comics, poetry, everything, what would you like to do? And you retort, well, a cookbook might be nice. Is that perhaps on your horizon?
I am rubbish at... The point I knew that I was never going to write a cookbook was there was a period of my life when I could make the world's greatest rice pudding. It was definitely the world's greatest rice pudding. I would give it to people and they would go, this is the best rice pudding I'd ever had. And I'd go, yeah, I know. And they go, this is absolutely amazing. How do you make it? And I went, I just make rice pudding. I'm very proud of it. They go, it's so good. I go, yeah. And then I mentioned this on my blog. And people said, can we have the recipe? And I thought, well, I should do this, shouldn't I? And I discovered it was sort of like light as a wave and a particle. I could either make the world's greatest rice pudding, or I could measure things out and actually find out how I did it and make a sad, inferior rice pudding that people would try and go, it's not as good as the one you made last week. I go, no, but I at least know what went into it this time. It's not being done by eye. And which is why I would make a terrible cookbook, because I have to say, well, you put some rice in as the beginning thing.
Well, I simply ask because, I mean, every year is a big year in Neil Gaiman's life, of course. But 2013, you have Doctor Who's forthcoming Cyberman story, Books of Magic, the deluxe edition, HBO's American Gods, probably have them? Yes. The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and it says here Untitled Sandman project that you announced at Comic-Con last year. Can you tell us a little bit about some of these projects? And you've left off 3. Oh, 3, yeah. Sorry.
You've left off Tuesday.
Yes, of course.
Which has just come out in America and I think is out here in Valentine's Day, which is the first book I've ever written for really little kids, tiny pre-literate ones. I made the fatal mistake of looking at Amazon.com because normally just don't look at Amazon.com. And if you do look at Amazon.com, don't look at the reviews. But there was a problem with the American copies of Tuesday, which is about a baby panda who sneezes, because they were held off the coast of New York by the hurricane, by Hurricane Sandy. And they sat in the center, the eye of the hurricane, and all of these books in their shipment got incredibly, the air was so moist that these books had strange wavy pages, and people started complaining their books were water damaged, and I went and looked at this. And I started noticing, I didn't mind the water damage complaints, but I was very upset when people would write reviews that would say things like, I'm a huge fan of Neil Gaiman's novels for adults, so I bought Tuesday, and I have to say, it is a very slight story. It's also very short, it's 32 pages, and it's about a baby panda, and you wonder if he's going to sneeze or not, and then he does. And you're going, you are not the intended audience.
It's no monster.
There are, well, I don't know. Chew's dangerous. It's a big sneeze. But so there's Tuesday, and then there's a couple of books there's a book I edited of short stories that's going to come out as a benefit for 826, the literacy program, called Unnatural Creatures. And then Ocean at the End of the Lane is going to come out. And then in the autumn, there'll be Sandman, and there will also be, Fortunately, the Milk. And Fortunately, the Milk is a book for probably, I don't know, 8, 9, 10-year-olds or adult 8, 9, 10-year-olds. It's sort of... Fortunately, the Milk is the silliest book I've ever written. And it includes things like a time-traveling stegosaurus in a hot air balloon, and pirates and vampires and ponies, the sparkly kind with things on their sides, and a volcano god, and aliens who look like elephant snot. And at one point you discover the aliens' secret plan is to redecorate the Earth, and which they are going to be doing by doing things like replacing Australia with a large decorative plate with a picture of Australia on it. And in fact, one of my favorite pieces of exchanges is when these aliens are finally caught by the intergalactic police. They're saying, you know, that what you did to Rigel 16 was unconscionable. There are still, and they're saying, we improved it. And they're saying, it doesn't improve anything to look up at a moon with flying ducks on it. But anyways, so this is an incredibly silly book, and that will be coming out too.
So you have a broad scope, and I like that. I loved a short story about John Bolton, and for those who haven't seen, I loved it. It's a short film fictionalised about a real artist called John Bolton, played by John O'Mahony, and It is just beautiful. And there's a bit where the interviewer says, do you ever just feel the urge to get out there on a sunny day and paint a piece of fruit? I won't ask that of you, but would you like to direct again and do that side of things?
I really like directing, but I also feel a fraud when I direct. I've done it a couple of times now. I wrote and directed a short film about John Bolton, wrote and directed a lovely little 8-minute film called Statuesque, starring Bill Nighy and a lady named Amanda Palmer, who I think is really pretty. And the music for that was done by Skip Shirey, who I assume is here somewhere. Does anyone in this audience have really strange hair? Wave. See? Strange hair?
Yeah.
Skip is somebody I can stand next to, and nobody ever comments about my hair. I stand next to Skip. It's brilliant. And he did the music for that. And I loved it. But I also do feel like a fraud just because then I talk to real directors and they start talking lenses with me, and they start talking directory things. And I don't really care about directory things. All I care about is having the power of because I say so. And it was the thing that frustrated me most when we made Neverwhere, the BBC TV series, because I wrote these scripts and I gave them to them. And then they did something else. And I'd say, well, why isn't she wearing the leather jacket that I wrote in the script? And the costumes lady would say, well, there's too much leather in this already. I said, well, she was the only one. And they'd say, not now she isn't. And they'd show me all the other things. And I wanted that, just the power of because I say so.
I love in the making of Stardust, though, you're sort of walking around the set and you see the big pirate ship that's flying, and you said, I kind of feel a little guilty that I create these things in my mind and then a director has to do them.
Actually, what I felt specifically guilty about on that was I had 2 characters stranded on a cloud, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to ask Charles Vess to paint a flying ship? So I wrote flying ship. It took 15 seconds to write the arrival of a flying ship. It possibly cost a tiny fraction of a penny's worth of ink. And I wrote a couple of pages of flying ship and had a lovely time and didn't think anything more of it. And now here was I, 12 years later, standing on a flying ship which 30 men had been laboring on for a month at the cost of £2 million. And furthermore, I also learned that because it was too big to ever get out the door, it would be destroyed before it was moved. And I thought, I have done something terrible. Why didn't I think of something cheap? And I felt that way until I was on the set of Coraline. And I ran into, I was doing a signing for the crew of Coraline because there were lots of fans. And a guy got up to the front of the line. He said, hey, I just saw the extras on the Stardust film. And I saw this bit where you're talking about, you know, feeling guilty because of the carpenters building the thing. And I said, yeah. He said, look, I'm a carpenter. If it wasn't for you, I'd be making cupboards. And I stopped feeling guilty.
And Robert De Niro wouldn't be wearing a girdle, although you didn't specifically write that.
I didn't. Actually, one of the things that I love about Doctor Who is I never feel guilty for anything I write in Doctor Who because they reuse it all. So even if they've had to grumpily go and build a whole section of giant corridor for the TARDIS, they've never had to build TARDIS corridor before, I'm sort of watching, you know, A Good Man Goes to War, and I'm going, hang on, they've repainted it, but that's my TARDIS corridor. So you do get this lovely feeling with Doctor Who that, you know, nobody's going to be smashing things up. They're going to be putting it in a cupboard somewhere and repainting it and bringing it out again.
And someone in the audience there will notice it too. Oh my God, they're reusing it. I'll be remiss in not asking. Tell it, because you've seen footage of the Cybermen. Just tell us anything that we can eat for crumbs after this.
Okay. I worry because, as everybody here undoubtedly knows, Stephen Moffat has a trained assassination squad.
Absolutely. They're in the corner.
Who will come after me if I say anything too much. I can tell you the title of the episode on the script, because a young actress left her script in a taxi and somebody took a photograph of it. I don't know if this will be the title of the episode, but it was called The Last Cyberman. I can tell you that my brief, people ask me, they say, with the Doctor's Wife, what did they tell you to do? And I said, they told me to write a Doctor Who episode. With the Cybermen, I had a much more complex and direct set of orders. I got an email from Stephen Moffat saying, would you mind making the Cybermen scarier again? And I thought, actually, when I was a kid, they were really scary. And the clanky ones are really cool, but they're not really scary. And then I tell kids this, and they go, are you mad? I'd say to like 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds, I'm making the Cybermen scary, and they go, Cybermen are scary. You go, no, I can make them scarier. So that was my mission. That was what I set out to do. I had this plan. I was going to make the Cybermen scary. I kind of got distracted on the way by some other stuff. So there's lots of other stuff in it too. And then when I just saw the rough cut of the episode, I'm going, there's really good, scary Cybermen, but I really did get distracted by all this other stuff. So it has, there we go, I can tell you that without being assassinated. It has Cybermen in it and other stuff.
Well, because when you were writing The Doctor's Wife, Matt Smith hadn't been cast and Rory wasn't part of it. Was that right?
That's true. I wrote the first draft of The Doctor's Wife without having... the Doctor had not yet been cast. And there wasn't a Rory in my script at all. So I then got to sort of rewrite it a little bit as I went. When I saw Matt's audition, I played with it a little bit. And then it got bounced because they ran out of money. The whole idea was, they fooled me. Frankly, they lied to me. Stephen Moffat said, Neil, what you want to do is just get it in first. If you get it in first, we'll have the money set aside, it will be fine, we'll have the budget for you. I believed him. I got my episode in first. And when they got up to it, it was episode 11. They did the Lodger episode. 2 men in a small flat in Cardiff with a mysterious upstairs that only exists for one shot because they were out of money. And if they could have shot The Doctor's Wife in a room in Cardiff with 2 people, they would have done. And, I was heartbroken. But they promised that I would have enough money. They would find the money to make the episode somehow, even if they had to take other episodes out behind the bike shed and beat them up and take their pocket money, which they did. So, but I then had, Rory had not existed, so I now had to rewrite it for Rory. But I also got to rewrite it now for Matt Smith, which was kind of fun. So, sequences like bunk beds are cool didn't exist in the first draft, but now they existed.
Oh, he's awesome, isn't he?
Is there something you want to tell us, Alicia?
I was telling Neil earlier about my nerdy crushes, and you were talking about your nerdy crushes, but maybe we'll leave that for later. You're also a singer. You sing Leon Payne's Psycho on with Amanda Palmer.
I I'm definitely many, many things, and a singer is absolutely not one of them. The New York Times said of me, he sings like a novelist, which I thought was not only apt and exact, but absolutely true.
But I love, you must, obviously, the love you have for Amanda Palmer shows, because she gets you to do labyrinths with sock puppets. You pop up in all these weird things. And there's this moment on YouTube I was watching where it's 4 o'clock in the morning, it's post her gig, and she's doing a version of Creep on a ukulele. And your heart, you're just swelling with love, and it's beautiful. It's such an intimate moment to watch. But do you like, because you've always been on top of technology and always reached out to your fans, but do you love that so much of your life is taken with snapshots?
You know, it's really weird with Amanda, because we both have our sort of lines in the sand on, you know, okay, this is personal, this is private, this is public, and this is stuff I'll blog about or tweet about or whatever. Unfortunately, our lines are in completely different places. And I have my sort of, okay, my line is over here, and Amanda's line is like somewhere way, way over there. Yeah. And so I very often turn around and find myself rather surprised to be living my life slightly more in public than I ever expected to. You know, I think it's as weird for her as it is for me. She, you know, my life plans did not include meeting and marrying an extrovert and often naked rock star.
She has good bras.
Yes.
Did I just say that out loud?
I thought that last word was going to go somewhere else.
Easter egg bazookas, me.
And she, and I really don't think she expected to find herself with an English, rather reserved author. And her solution to it, you know, it's like when we went off on an evening with Neil Gaiman and Amanda Palmer, I had a vision of how that was going to go. I would read stories and poems and bits, and she would sing. It seemed like a proper demarcation line, you know. I knew who did what. And then she said, well, okay, so we'll do this, and of course, these are your songs. Okay, I don't do that. I'm the writery one. And I discovered it was actually easier just to sing than to argue. Because she wins the arguments. And if I win the argument, I'm in real trouble. So it's actually easier for her to win the argument. So I went over and very, very nervously would do the songs. And then it got sort of a bit mad. It got particularly mad at Hobart this weekend, at the point where I'm sort of up on a stage in front of 5,000 people with David Byrne backing me up and you know, Annie Clarks and Vincent taking me to one side and going, I really like that Fireball XL5 song you did. And this is just too weird. So.
I'm sure someone said this before, but Amanda Palmer looks like death. Hotted up death, but death. No, just me?
I don't know. People say she looks like death. People also, a lot of people say she looks like desire. I just think she looks cute. You know, yeah. I think she looks hot.
I love this
frankly.
quote on YouTube from Noodles with 4 M's. I love Neil Gaiman and Amanda Palmer. If they had a baby, it would probably be Jesus.
It will probably have really strange hair and no eyebrows.
But great bras.
There's somebody out there in the audience going, I thought we were coming for a serious literary discussion.
I apologise, I'll give the fans. Oh, well, you say about your fans, you think your fans are the coolest in the world, and look at them, aren't they sexy? And from
great T-shirt. senses out there too. I'm very impressed.
Melbourne does that. From the People versus George Lucas, you got this little bit in it. You say fans know exactly what they want. Fans want more of what they liked. They like the last thing you did and want more of that, please. You also said fan edits are cool, just don't come knocking on my door. But how do you cope with the Neil Gaiman, the entity, and not the writer as such? Like the fan, is it one and the same? Do the fans encroach, or do you like chatting with them? Or having convoluted questions asked?
I love my fans, and I love my readers, and I, long ago, it was back at the very beginning of Sandman. It was the very first, I'd done the first 5 or 6 issues, and issue 4, which was called A Hope in Hell, had struck a nerve. And it was the first time I'd watched just the fan mail start pouring in, and people were going, we love this, we love Lucifer, we want to see him come back, we love Sandman in Hell, this is great, this is really cool. And I got to the end of that storyline, and I thought, okay, I have 2 storylines in my head. I have this thing called Season of Mists, and it's about the devil quitting hell and leaving it as this important plot of psychic real estate to the Lord of Dreams and all of the people who want it. And I know that everybody's going to love this based on that. Or I could do this weird thing called The Doll's House with a serial killers convention, and I have no idea if anybody's going to like that or not. Mm. And I thought, if I go in right now and do Season of Mist and do the thing that everybody loves, I'm going to be playing to an audience for the rest of my life. If I do the one that I love, maybe some people will like it, maybe they won't, but it'll be my thing. And that's pretty much how it's been ever since. If you do something for an audience that likes it, they will ask you for more because they liked it. It makes sense. The question, when are you going to do a sequel to, is one that I hear a lot. And then people think that I'm anti-sequels. I saw something recently online when somebody was saying, I hear there's going to be a sequel to this, but you never do sequels. I'm going, no, it's not that I never do sequels. I have the best of intentions. I would love to write Neverwhere 2. I absolutely mean to write American Gods 2. I set out to write American Gods 2, only I accidentally wrote The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
Whoops.
I would have loved to have written Neverwhere, except I'd never written American Gods, and it seemed more interesting to write American Gods than to write Neverwhere. So the sort of the weird sequel-y thing, for me, is definitely a part of the relationship with fans. But on the other hand, I like the quality of fans you get. Because what I wind up with is, I remember when I was a very young journalist and I met and interviewed a lot of authors, and the saddest authors that I met, and there were some really sad authors, not during the interview, but when you went out for a drink afterwards, and they'd start telling you, and some of these were really seriously important best-selling authors, they'd start telling me about the books their publishers wouldn't publish. And, this one would have a historical novel set in the French Revolution and nobody would publish it because this was what she was famous for. And this guy had a great novel that he was so proud of about a race between 2 steamships. And again, he was famous for this hard-boiled detective fiction and nobody would publish it. And his publishers had advised him against it. And I'd listen to these authors and I'd look at how sad they were. And I thought, I have to, when I'm an author one day, the only thing I want my books to have in common is that they have my name on them. and that people who like the kind of thing I do will probably like them. And if I'm really lucky and I do this really well, then maybe if somebody reads one of my books and likes it and reads another one of my books and doesn't like it, the third one will be given different again, and they'll come back and give me a chance. They won't... I don't want to be somebody who just does this one thing over and over and over. And that was definitely my mindset as a writer. Having said that, of course, what actually happens is once you've written, 30 or 40 things, you get these lovely academics, mostly coming out of the woodwork, explaining how you've written the same thing over and over again. And then all you can do is sort of say, well, I know it looks that way in hindsight, but trust me, coming forward, I thought I was doing different things.
Well, you can have something thematically running through that is similar, but you are very diverse. And I had a mini Neil Gaiman festival with chocolate the last week, and there was movies and clips and comics and songs and everything. And it also led me, I'd say, I'll just pick up H.P. Lovecraft or Ray Bradbury. And then I just kept going through, and I was having my own real life Google search in the real world. And just to be immersed in one author, I highly recommend it for anyone, because we often just read maybe a book a year from an author, but to read them all in one go and revisiting many again was truly splendid. So
I love the idea that I got to send you to other authors too. That for me is one of those things that I've always loved, and I've always felt that it was a kind of weird responsibility that you have as an author, because authors that I loved would do it to me, of just saying, look, go and there's this fantastic author, and I'm gonna rip them off. But I'm gonna tell you that I'm ripping them off. Go and read the original. And the joy for me of doing something like, well, say, A Study in Emerald, where I got to mash up H.P. Lovecraft and Sherlock Holmes and A Study in Scarlet, is that people like the story, and then they'll go off and read A Study in Scarlet, and then they'll go off and read more Sherlock Holmes, and they'll go off and read some H.P. Lovecraft, and then they'll come back and read my story again and go, oh, I see what you're doing now, and I thought it was good before, but now actually it's about different things.
Well, I was being a nerd and doing that. Good.
I love that.
The next question just went out of my head, but we're near. We'll have questions any second. One of my favourite books of all time is The Fermata by Nicholson Baker, and I read on Wikipedia that you had written 3 drafts of a screenplay. Do you think that will ever see light?
I don't know. I loved writing it. And I loved writing it for the same reason that I normally don't like adapting my own stuff, which is very often, in order to make something a film, you have to do horrible violence to it. You have to cut off its arm because it's just not going to fit. And then you have to figure, okay, in order to get it to work without an arm, you're going to have to sort of take this weird little doll's arm and stick it on there. And you're doing horrible violence, but if it works, you're still actually there with the story. And with the Fermata, you have this weird and gloriously problematic novel about a man who can stop time and undress ladies.
I kept seeing Patrick Stewart in the role, and for those of you who've seen the extras, you'll know what I mean. But
and it's it's a very, very weird and it's basically a sort of 12, 13-year-old sex fantasy written by a great novelist at 600 pages, and it's beautifully written and weird and extreme. And Robert Zemeckis came to me and said, will you do it as a script? And I did 3 or 4 different drafts for him. And then he got kind of sidetracked onto
the Polar Express.
Well, the motion, it was Polar Express and motion capture technology. And he kept saying that he wanted to do Fermata with motion capture technology, but it wasn't there yet, so he couldn't really. And now he's seems to have left motion capture technology. He just made flight. So maybe one day the Fermata will come out. But it is also one reason why I don't write a lot of film scripts, is it makes me sad when I put a lot of work into something and nobody ever sees it. It just never happens. I would rather spend, a month working on a short story that I get paid £300 for and get to use in my own short story collection a few years up the line, than I would spend the time on a $1 million Hollywood script that nobody is ever going to see, because it just feels weird.
I want to see Neil Gaiman's Fermata with Patrick Stewart. That'll be... we should go to the audience. We're going to have microphones up the front, so you must come down and speak.
The best thing for me about last year's gig, at which I followed Tom Stoppard, was the YouTube clip of Tom Stoppard in the Sydney Opera House the following day at the beginning of the Q&A section of his event, where he said, as Neil Gaiman said yesterday, a question is a short interrogative statement capable of being answered by the person on the stage. And he was very proud. He pointed that out and he credited me. So for anybody here in any doubt, that is what a question is. And if any of you start doing the things that people do, particularly at American comic conventions, but they'll say things like, I'm a huge fan of yours, Mr. Gaiman, and I was wondering that on page 12 of panel 34 of Sandman, I have a theory, which is a theory that is mine that I am going to expound to you now. And you just sort of, you get to the point where you have to say to them, you have to stop talking now or the people around you will kill you. Do not be that person. I love you. Everyone's scared now.
Any questions? You want to come up?
No, we've scared you too much.
Well, just quickly while that person's coming down, American Gods, I love the version of Patton Oswalt doing a little bit of American Gods. Do you know
you can't have seen daylight. You've just got to be sitting there watching YouTube videos with my name on.
No, I'm a fan.
Yes, Patton Oswalt being swallowed by a goddess.
Yeah, goddess, yes. The vagina implied. I like that. Has it been cast? I mean, is it...
No, it's when I get home. The pilot script is in its second or third draft. When I get home on Monday, there will be a big conference call with HBO, and they will tell me the things that they want me to put into it before they shoot it. And I have some suggestions of my own, and then it will probably be cast in 2013. We will probably shoot the pilot and possibly some more in 2013, but I wouldn't expect it on your screens till 2014.
That's exciting. Okay, yes.
I'm wondering if you can tell us about those nerdy crushes that were alluded to earlier.
Alicia she was telling me her crushes, and I admitted to my two huge ones, which were Elizabeth Montgomery in the black and white original first couple of seasons of Bewitched, and Caroline Jones as Morticia Addams in The Addams Family. So.
Up there? Is it?
Thank you. Hi. I was one of the many millions of people who watched your amazing commencement speech, and I was just wondering about whether you expected the kind of response that got, and how you sort of felt about the reaction and people's responses to you.
I didn't even know it was being filmed. I was there because I got an email saying, would you like to come and give the commencement speech to the University of the Arts in Philadelphia? We will give you an honorary doctorate of the arts, and we'd love you to come. And I really wanted to go to Philadelphia with Amanda to go and see my friend Carl Cassidy, who lives in Philadelphia. So it seemed like a fun little mad project. And I thought, well, I never actually went to college or anything. I just wanted to write, and I went off and I wrote. But I know all this stuff from having done this for 30 years, relatively successfully. I will just try and write down everything I know, and I'll tell them. I don't know if that's what you do in commencement speeches, but that's what I'll do in mine. And I had Amanda as my guinea pig, and she listened to 3 different versions of the speech. And her main function as a guinea pig was saying every now and then, oh, that's the kind of cliched shit they put in commencement speeches. You'll want to leave that out. I'll say, but I was proud of that bit. And she'll say, no, they've heard that before. And I go, well, what if I change it a bit and say this? And she said, yeah, you can do that. So I gave the speech in Philadelphia in front of an audience of lots of graduating young artists, and Amanda Palmer and Meow Meow. Melbourne's own Meow Meow was there. And I was incredibly proud of my speech.
Yeah.
And but I thought that was it. I thought I'd given my speech, they clapped, they'd given me a funny hat, they put the thing on crooked. It was great, I was done. And then they put it up on Vimeo. And I don't think I've ever had anything do the actually going viral thing before. And it went viral, and people were sending it to their friends. And suddenly people were writing articles about, the best commencement speeches of the year. I didn't know they wrote those articles. And there am I, and the best commencement speeches of the year. And then my agent calls me, very baffled, saying, people want to publish your speech as a book. And I'm going, it's 1,200 words. And she said, well, I've got all these letters from people. And I said, well, we should probably approach my publisher. So I went to my publisher and I said, do you want to publish it? And they said, well, it's like 1,200 words. I said, I know! It's not my fault. And so what we did was we went to an amazing designer named Chip Kidd. And Chip Kidd is probably the best book designer in the world. And we said, Chip, would you like to just take my script, my speech, and make it into a book, and you can do whatever you want? And he read it, and he said yes. And then he started doing all this stuff, and he handed the stuff that he was doing in to HarperCollins, and they went, you can't do this. He said, I can. Read the speech. And it shut them up. It was glorious. So he does all of these things that you're not allowed to do as a typographer, because he read the speech and went, I'm allowed to do this, including the fact that the title of the book on the front cover is wrong. They're going, you can't do that. He said, yes, I can.
Karen Berger was your editor on the Sandman comics, and she's leaving Vertigo once the new book comes out. Can you just tell us what sort of influence she had on your writing?
She had almost no influence on my writing, except she was the nicest, smartest person I've ever dealt with on a long-running basis, and she had absolute confidence in me. And in terms of influence on my writing, you sort of think of, well, and as an editor, did she change any lines? No, not really. Did she tell me what to write? No. What did she do? She was great. She had confidence in me. And like Dumbo's magic feather. And I flew. And that, Karen is still going to be editing, even though she's leaving Vertigo. She's going to be working with Shelley Bond, who was the assistant editor on Sandman from Sandman 47 onwards, I think. And Shelley and Karen are going to be working together as my editors. And she's absolutely fantastic. And I'm certain that whatever Karen does out in the world, she's going to do it with panache and brilliance.
Up there.
Hi. I just had a question about, considering how crazy your schedule is for 2013, how do you actually find the time to do what your main job is, which is writing? Do you sequester yourself? Is it the same as what you did at the start of your career?
There's definitely sequestering that goes on. The Ocean at the End of the Lane was a accidental novel that was written mostly because my wife came to Melbourne to write an album and record an album. And I was a bit grumpy and a bit lonely and announced that I was going off to write a book then. And
on Twitter.
Borrowed a house from a friend of mine in Florida and went down there and went down to write American Gods 2. But before I could write American Gods 2, I had to write a short story that occurred between American Gods 1 and 2, and I started writing that, and then I got a bit stuck on it. And it was the kind of getting stuck on a short story that only lasts a couple of days. But it suddenly occurred to me that there was this little short story that I'd begun a few months earlier and stopped, and I knew what happened next in it. So I thought, well, I'll finish that, and then I'm going to get cracking on the novel. And each day I would write another couple of thousand words. And each day I'd know what happened next. And there was a point where I sort of looked around and went, this is a novella. And then I'm going, no, this isn't a novella. This actually reached novel form. It just kept going. But the sequestering definitely worked, and worked really well. I can normally write anywhere. I was a journalist, and I would write in loud newsrooms, and people would be typing, and people would be shouting at other people and weird stuff, and you still have to get your copy in. So that was where I learned to write. I love just going off to coffee shops and writing. I love sitting in corners where there are people around and writing. The biggest problem I have is a kind of weird elves and shoemakers kind of problem, which is I love finding sort of coffee shop kind of places to write, and I will stay there until somebody comes up and notices me and knows who I am and what I'm doing. And then I can't go there anymore because I'm now going, people might be watching me. And writing a novel or a short story should never be a performance sport. It is something that I need to be able to make the kind of faces that my children mock me for because they watched me writing. And they say, Dad, do you know that you do all the facial expressions of your characters while you're writing? And I go, what? And they go, you were just going. And then you went, and then you went. I'm going, really? And I say, well, what's happening in the story? I say, well, I've got somebody going, somebody going. But I really, I do, and I'm sort of off in, and my hair gets incredibly weird because I run my hands through it an awful lot. It seems to be somehow intrinsic to the process, and by the end of it, it's all over the place. And I'm absolutely fine with that as long as I'm just the guy in the corner writing. The moment that somebody comes up to me and says, excuse me, you're Neil Gaiman, and I know you're Neil Gaiman because I look a little bit like you. And when I was in this, I was writing here in this cafe recently, and some women came over and they actually left a note on my windshield with drawings of themselves and a cake. And I said, right, I can never be here again. I have to go back.
I'm so sorry. We only have time for one last question, and I'm sure all of your questions are amazing, and I wish I could bottle it up. You over there.
My question's kind of another development hell one, which is essentially good omens, question mark. Good Omens. Anything?
Good Omens. You know, the trouble with all of the development hell questions is they are all... and I'll see if I can wrap a bunch of them up in one. Movies never happen unless they happen. Television series never happen unless they happen, and then they happen and surprise everybody. And sometimes they seem very close to happening, and then sometimes they stop happening, and sometimes they happen again. And as the writer, you have almost no control over any of this. What you do is you find nice people who you trust and you let them get on with it. Next year, there are some amazing, weird things floating around looking for financing right now. John Cameron Mitchell, who did Hedwig and the Angry Inch, wants to make a film of my short story, How to Talk to Girls at Parties. And I've read the script, and it's this wonderful, weird, strange, goofy, glorious script about... It basically just, the first half of the script is the short story, and the second half of the script is what happens after. And it's magic. There's a murder mysteries film out there that was meant to start shooting now, but there are some problems with it, and it's been held up, and it may be later, or it may be never. The Good Omens TV series was in early stages of production. It had some writers, it had a TV station, and then it sort of wound up getting pulled back. Now I think it's going to be made through Narrativia, Terry Pratchett's production company, but I'm really not sure of the details. Meanwhile, Terry Gilliam still wants to make Good Omens as a movie, and as far as I know, Terry Pratchett and I would love this to happen. If anybody will ever give Terry Gilliam lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of money. You've got... There are films out there... I did this thing relatively recently, over the last couple of years, where when really interesting filmmakers turn up, I try and say yes to them, particularly with short stories, and just go, okay, you're really interesting. Let's see what you do. Right now, it looks like there's an Ocean at the End of the Lane film because a fantastic director whose work I love read, and it was sent an advance copy by my agent, and we Skyped, and he said, I want to do it. And I went, oh. But you know, until... The truth is, until these things happen, they're not true, they're not real. And Coraline, I was astonished to see that the contract for Coraline was actually signed 9 years to the day before the premiere. And there were points where the contract for Coraline actually had expired, and I... went back to Henry Selick and just said, I have confidence in you. Please keep going. And it might not have happened, and then one day it did, and that seems to be the way that films happen. Stardust had been bought by Miramax and did an outline for them, and they didn't like my outline, so they fired me. And they hired somebody else, and he did an outline for them, and they didn't like that, and they dropped the project and stole a few bits of Stardust. That writer then took a few bits of Stardust and put them in his next movie for Miramax, and which I only... I'm not telling you. Okay. It wasn't a big deal, but it only made me grumpy because then we couldn't use those bits in Stardust, because we're sort of going, oh, he's already done that. And hang on, this is the same guy who wrote and the point on that was then Stardust came back to life, and came back to life fast, and happened primarily because Matthew Vaughn walked off the set of X-Men 3, 3 weeks before he was meant to start shooting it, just because they wouldn't give him the budget that he wanted. And he said, this film is going to end in, if you won't give me the budget, it's going to have to end in this mighty tiddlywinks match between Professor Xavier and Magneto, and I'm not doing it. And he walked off and phoned me up and said, hey, I think I'm going to do Stardust right now. And I said, cool, and he did. So things happen suddenly and strangely, and they don't happen for reasons as unlikely. And that is the film business. And it's why I write novels.
But you also write poetry. Please read me a poem. The audience, not just me, personally.
Okay, we'll go back to the green room, and I will. So I actually wanted to read this. I volunteered, and I've read it before in Melbourne, but I've only ever written one poem that was specifically Australian. And I wrote it to read at the Sydney Opera House in 2011 on Australia Day. And they asked me to write a poem. And the great thing about this poem for me was not that I got to perform it at Sydney Opera House. And it's not that I got to perform it on the stage a few days ago in Hobart with Brian Ritchie playing the didgeridoo and David Byrne making weird, screamy noises on a guitar behind me. It's actually the fact that this is the only place in the world I can come where this poem means anything at all to anybody. It's like I have this one poem that if I read it to Americans, they go, well, that was nice. I have no idea what it's about. And I can read it here and everybody goes, oh. And they laugh at the funny bit, which Americans wouldn't. So you get to be, and the last time I performed it here was on New Year's Eve, and I had shadow puppets. And I don't have shadow puppets today. Or a violinist improvising. And it's a poem about Australia Day. We killed them all when we came here. The people came and burned their land, the forests where they used to feed. We burned the trees that gave them shade and burned to bush, to scrub, to heath. We made it easier to hunt. We changed the land, and they were gone. Today our beasts and dreams are small as species fall to time and us. But back before the black folk came, before the white folks' fleet arrived, before we built our cities here, before the casual genocide, this was the land where nightmares loped and hopped and ran and crawled and slid. And then we did the things we did, and thus we died, the things we died. We have not seen Diprotodon, a wombat bigger than a room, or run from Dromornithidae, gigantic demon ducks of doom, or motor legs and ripping beaks, a flock of geese from hell's dark moor. We've lost carnivorous kangaroos, a bouncy furrier T-Rex, and Thylacoleo carnifex, the rat king devil lion thing, the drop bear fantasy made flesh. Quincana, the land crocodile, 5 meters long and fast as fright. Wanambi, the enormous snake who waited by the water holes and took the ones who came to drink, who were not watchful, clever, bright. Our thylacines were tiger wolves until we drove them off the map. Then Megalania, 7 meters, a venomous, enormous lizard, and more, the ones whose bones we've never seen. The megafauna haunt our dreams. This was their land before mankind, just 50,000 years ago. Time is a beast that eats and eats, gives nothing back but ash and bones. And one day someone else will come to excavate a heap of stones and wonder, what were people like? Their teeth weren't sharp, their feet were slow. They walked Australia long ago before time took them into tales. We're transients. The land remains until its outlines wash away, while night falls down like drop bears don't, to swallow up Australia Day. Thank you very much.
We can't have Amanda Palmer with the only rock star. Thank you. So a big rock star, maybe a standing ovation for Neil Gaiman.